We got Brian Baumgartner on. You know him as Kevin Malone. And we just finished up with Creed Bratton, who told us that we were going to be surprised by your voice. That if we hadn't heard your voice outside of Kevin, that I don't know why that's so, like, of course you don't really talk like that. That would be so fucking weird if you talk like Kevin Malone. So yeah, that makes sense, but it still is kind of funny to hear your real voice.
Is it weird? Is it weird for you?
Yeah, well, a little, although, I mean, it's not like, when he said that, I pictured that you had a voice that was like entire, so it's not that big of a difference, but it is funny to think that the whole time you're on the show, you're just doing like the dumb guy voice.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I think that it's more the speed with which I talk. I had a little bit that I would do going into meetings, right? Like going into ABC and the executive, we're going to sell this new show. And we would go in and we would sit down and we would be at the conference table and they'd be around the other side. And I would start talking about the show and this is what it's going to be and how we're going to approach it. And you would just see the eye glaze, right? You would just see no one is listening to what I'm saying. And so I would build this into a pitch where about a minute in, I'd be like, all right, guys, so you've not been expecting me to sound the way that I have. So you've heard nothing that I have said so far. So I'm now going to rewind. I'm going to go back. Let's go. And everyone would like laugh. And then we would go back and we would have a conversation. But yes, that, and people approaching me on the street or whatever, that the expectation versus reality is.
It kind of changes my whole opinion of you as an actor almost. Like that makes that role considerably harder in my mind, that you had to sit there and talk so deliberately slow. Again, I can't believe I thought it was real, because like who would talk that way? But I mean, it must have been a grind to just sit there and, doofus it up all the time.
Yeah, well, I think part of what was special about, the collection of actors that had on the show, I mean, I think one of the things that made it super unique was the variety of experience that the actors came from, right? So like Rainn Wilson and I'm not going to mention everybody, but just to give you an idea, like Rainn Wilson and myself, we were from straight theater, right? And then there was like Steve Carell and Kate Flannery and Oscar Nunez and Angela. They were like improv guys. And then like Craig Robinson, maybe the funniest stand-up that I've ever seen in my life. And BJ Novak, amazing stand-up guy. So we had all of these different experiences. And so, yeah, like for me and for Rainn, who played Dwight, like creating a character, that's what we did. So for us, it only made sense to like, okay, well, what if we bring in a little bit of this, or, like I always say, like my jaw was different. My jaw was different. My body was different. Not as sexy, but I mean like, but I always approached it like Kevin is just a guy that if he turns, right, his entire body is going to turn to the side. He doesn't have any flexibility, like at the hips. That's a great
way to describe it, yeah.
And so, and also just like that, my feet were like roots into the ground. There's no like swaying or like, talking like this back and forth. It just, so those are like, they were like physical things, and the voice was just sort of a manifestation of that.
Now, do you ever get like, because it is such comfort TV for so many people, the whole world really, that I feel like people kind of just think it's easy. Are you ever like, no, this was hard. Like I was reading you describing about the chili scene and how you dropped it and how much like body acting, how that had to be one take. Are you like, this was really hard for me to do? I'm really fucking good at this. Like it's not, you might find it
okay?
You find it an easy watch, but like, this is because of how good I am.
Well, okay. One, let me be very, very, very clear. I am not performing brain surgery. Okay, so let me just say, just straight up, off the top, I am well aware of that. But yeah, I mean, I think that, particularly as the show went on, there was more physical, stuff for Kevin, and trying to make large physical acts look believable. I mean, there's one, probably my most painful one, that I feel like at times I'm still like, oh yeah, that's Rainn right there. I don't even remember. Somehow I don't even remember the setup, but somehow Kevin had something over on Dwight, and Dwight had to do things for him. And at one point, he was giving me a massage in my chair, and Kevin is in the chair, and he's giving me a massage. But and by the way, Dwight, another very physical character as well, is massaging my back and crawling up the file cabinet at the same time, is like on me, like doing. And Kevin is just supposed to be like, just sit there, right? Like he's enjoying this, because it would take this much physical effort to affect anything in Kevin's back or whatever. Anyway, just things like that. The simplest one, I just referenced this one. I'd forgotten about it. Never think about it. There was, the episode was office workers and the warehouse workers are going to change places. And the office workers are trying to figure out how to load, millions of boxes of paper onto a thing. And so they decided to put grease on the floor to be able to slide the grease. And we call them the talking heads, right? Where the characters are talking to the cameras. And I'm pretty sure that it's Jim who's like just talking to the and Kevin is behind spreading grease and just slips. Just bang, just classic physical, like Chevy Chase back in the day. Yeah. And I must have done that 25 times. And now I'm like, that still gets me right in the ass.
People take it. I do think they take it for granted. I think they think it must have been as fun for you guys to do as it was for us to watch. But I mean, a job's a job, right? I mean, were there times?
But it really was. No, I mean, and I'm making jokes about it now, but no, it was, we had an absolute blast, and I feel so lucky. I think what people don't realize, I haven't really talked about this, again, not brain surgery, I'm just going to keep saying that. But, I think that there is, especially today in reality world, you don't really, you find a lot of people who don't have training who are on television, right? Mm-hmm. Not really actors, but but celebrity, right? And there's the whole, like, I just want to be on TV. I want to be famous. I want to be on TV. And I think there is an idea that, like, if you have a certain look or whatever, you can just be on TV, right? There's no effort involved. Whereas, like, well, no, I went to college for this, like I did theater for 8 years before this. Like, there was a lot that sort of went into it, again, for me. So, not brain surgery, but yes.
But I think it paid off. It works. Right. If you went to college and you did all this work, you landed on, you could make the argument the most iconic comedy in TV history. We had a guy reach out the other day. I don't know where this fella has been, but he said, guys, I need to start a show that I've never watched before. Should I watch The Office, It's Always Sunny, and what was the third one, John?
I want to say it was Parks and Rec, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, or like Arrested Development. Like, what are the other, like, iconic comedies? And we were like, dude, first of all, how the fuck is that even possible that you've never seen any of those? But the consensus was, out of all those, because they're all great, pick The Office because it's the most culturally relevant. Like, you'll get the jokes, you'll understand references. There are lines that you've been probably just laughing at parties that you're going to realize are from The Office. So It really is like that important of a show. Well,
part of why I started this podcast, An Oral History of The Office, is kind of based on what you said, but it was really wanting to look at why. Like, it was all based on a question, like a true, like, exploration, which is, we haven't filmed the show in 7 years. The last scene was filmed 7 years ago. Yet, by any metric that anyone can show me, it is the most watched show in television today. I'm talking new shows that launching on NBC Thursday night now, or Netflix or whatever. And you look at the numbers, and the numbers are they are mind-boggling. Like, the first day of the shutdown, Sunday, March the 15th, they kind of call that the first day. Mm-hmm. 250 million minutes were streamed on Netflix alone on that day.
That day,
which is an incredible.
No, I don't even understand it. Like, what is that?
It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. It's like 82 billion minutes in 2018. These numbers make no sense.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to Rainn Wilson during the podcast about this, and I'm saying these numbers, and he's like, "What? This is not like that's a can't even." And so it's not just like The Office is popular today. It's that The Office is more popular today than when we were on at 9 o'clock on Thursday nights and the top scripted show on NBC.
Right.
But it's like between The Office and anything else that's on, there is such an enormous gap. It's truly mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So it was really about going like, okay, why? Like, why is it so popular? Why has it had endured? Why do all of these, 13, 14, 12, 11-year-olds, why are they watching it? And they don't even know it was ever on NBC. They're like, oh, have you seen the Netflix show?
Yeah, yeah.
And so going back and really examining the decisions that were made early on about casting, about bringing in, certain key creatives. And if we can find any clues then as to why it has endured so well and so successfully and is bigger today than it was then.
If you had to pick one thing that you think is the majority reason for that, what do you think it is?
Well, I'm not going to give up the end of the podcast, but I'll tell you two things that are, I think, contribute to it. One is, I think that when we were doing the show, right? We're doing the show and we're like, oh, we're almost canceled forever too, which is another thing we talk about because people on Netflix are like, oh, they did 200 whatever. And it's like, no. We did 6 and we were dead. And then we had one guy risk his entire career and we got 6 more, or a total of 12. And then we were dead. And then all of these things happen. But when we were there and we were like, oh, is it gonna stay on or whatever? I remember there was some like log line that we had. I don't remember the numbers, but it was like, there are 200 million Americans who work in offices, right? So if a certain percentage of those people like this show, we're going to be good to go, right? That was the idea. I think in the end, maybe that's true, but that's not why it's successful. It's that young people are watching it. It's that the subversive nature of the show and the comedy of the show, that we were not making it for them, but
that's everything. Getting the youth in, right?
The experience of sitting in a school classroom with a potentially unreasonable boss / teacher, sitting next to people that you haven't chosen to sit next to. And if you're going through year after year and year, it's the same kids every year in school that you're stuck with. And there's little Johnny who picks his nose, and there's, bitchy Sarah, and there's, like the archetypes that exist there. Right. And that idea of being stuck together with a group of people, I think, translated in a way that we were not intending, but that did. Yeah,
I mean, when you get a song, a show, some clothes, style, whatever, the best thing to do is get like the young weirdos to pick it up, the young weird kids who are just like, yeah, this is cool, and they decide what's cool and funny. But I do think there's an element of like, it's if you work in a corporate setting, you get it.
Yes.
And even if you don't work in one, that setting it's
very universal. Because I've never worked in a corporate setting, and I love that show. I fell in love with that show. I know the exact episode. It was I forget the name of it now, but it was season 1. It was the race relations day.
Diversity day, yeah.
The title of the episode is. But like, I had a friend come into my dorm in high school and be like, "You gotta watch this episode." And like right away, everything clicked. I was just in high school, and I was like, "Yeah, I get this. The paradigm here works for sure."
Right. There's the second thing that I was going to say, which this was a new discovery for me on the podcast for sure, and we discussed this, but if you are you watch The Last Dance, Michael Jordan documentary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you watch a documentary, it by definition cannot be dated because you're looking at a specific time and place, right? So you don't look at a documentary about the 70s and go like, oh my God, that's so dated, right? Because you're looking at a documentary about the 70s. And of course they're going to have 70s style hair and they're going to have whatever. And so I think the other thing was that it was shot as a documentary, that it exists in this time and place. You don't ever think that. You don't ever go like, oh, and Greg Daniels, who was the creator, talked to me some about like not wanting to put too much like current pop culture references, like not wanting to sort of date it specifically in that way, but in terms of technology and the use of the computers and the computers that we have and all that stuff, it's fucking old, right? But the fact that the way it was shot that way is like, oh, we're looking at these people in this slice of life.
And you know what? All right, the computers, sure. And phones probably. But other than that, like office clothes is still shirts and ties and
that's Scranton.
And yes, I mean, when you look at that, you don't go like, oh, that's so early 2000s. You'll never. That is universal. And that mockumentary vibe, I think we almost take that for granted because it just became what The Office and then Parks and Rec and other shows kind of did. But that at least in America, that was like the first one to really hit. And that's a huge part of it too, where you feel like you're watching reality, but you're not. It's scripted. It's perfect.
Totally. Yeah. And, we talk about that too. I in the podcast, in fact, the third episode is called Everything That Makes It Harder Makes It Better. And the reason that we call that episode that, one is it kind of is a tease that that's what she said. But the idea, this was a quote that I guess Greg Daniels talked to our director of photography at the time. And the idea that in the show, that it is shot, everything, there's nothing is faked. So in other words, if it's a documentary and we have two cameras and they're moving around and they're shooting everybody, right? You don't ever see a spot. Let me break it down. Michael Scott is talking in front of the conference room, right? So we have a shot on Michael Scott, right? And then we have another shot on the people who are sitting, listening to him and talking to him and responding, right? So the easiest way, how most television shows would shoot, is we would shoot Steve Carell, and then we would stop, and then there would be a camera that would stand right where Steve Carell was, right? Because that's a straight shot back at everybody else that's watching. That's how it would be shot. 100% of the time, that's how you would shoot that scene. But they said no, because if we do that, where is the camera who's shooting them? He would be standing in front of Michael Scott. We can't have the camera there, because if this scene were happening in real time, like a documentary, we would see that camera. So having to find different angles, strange angles, corners, moving around pillars that, through plants, all of those things were taken from reality TV and truly made the show way more difficult to shoot, but also gives it that vibe that you're like spying in, you're like leaning in, wanting to see stuff. And so that's one of the things that we talk about in the podcast, about the things that people would never think about.
Oh, you would never pick that up.
Never. And you don't even
realize that it's making it better, but it is.
It is. And so you go back and if you start looking at those things and the weird angles that it's shot from that you don't think about, you're like, oh yeah, like, and that was a rule. I mean, that was like a hard, fast, like rule. The example I'll very quickly in the podcast they talk about is there were two guys and they were from reality TV and they called it the dance, right? So they're moving, one guy moves this way, the other guy counters this way, and they're kind of watching each other out of the corner of their eye. They would talk about going into Michael's office, right? So Michael and let's just say Dwight goes in the office, and Michael's charging ahead into the office, and there's a camera behind him, and he's following him into the office. And what they would have was the other camera guy would be behind the door, right? And so they would come in, you would see that shot, and then as soon as it passed the door would close, and the camera guy would come out there, right? You would never think about that. You would never see that, but that's the only way that they could make it work. So as you're watching it, you're seeing not something shot perfectly framed. You're seeing people having to fight and get around things for a shot, which I think made it better.
Yeah, well, that's what we were I think what we were saying in the beginning is like, that's fucking awesome and intricate and detailed and like the art of it all. And people think it's, that's what she said. And it's a lot more the dance.
Right.
You said that you know that there's not much dated in the show, but we were not joking. We were just talking earlier with Creed, first of all, where he was telling about a deleted scene you guys were in where Jan was talking about the natural birth and it was like Omaha Beach or whatever. And he's like, that stuff we'd never get away with today. And we recently talked about the line where Michael was like, when I was a kid, gay meant lame or whatever he said. And like now it means homosexual. Do you think that there are how many lines do you think there are that wouldn't play today?
Well, I have a standard answer for this because I think it's quintessential The Office. I think it's the shot is Steve Carell, which by the way, this he came up with that made us laugh in the room. Early on, he takes his chair and he turns it around. One of the chairs in the conference room. We're in the conference room. He turns it around, right? So he's straddling the back of the chair and he's leaning on the back of the chair and he's getting really intimate. And he leans into Oscar and he says, Oscar, what's a term that's less offensive than Mexican?
Classic. It's the one line.
And Oscar, it's one of my favorites. And Oscar says that Mexican is not offensive, Michael. I'm paraphrasing all this, by the way, but
right.
and he goes, yeah, but what's something that's less offensive, right? You can't say that, right? You can't say that today. But think about the sum total of that scene. You have someone based on their physicality who is really trying to do good, right? But he can't. He's not capable. He's misguided in a weird way, and he just doesn't. But he's trying to be better, and he's just saying a thing that, by the way, would be said by people. But the sum total is every other person in that room is going, that is a horrible thing to say, by their facial expression, by their groan, whatever it is. So the sum total of that scene is, you are not allowed to say that, right? And I think so often we need black and white. We need, you can't say that. Well, why not? If what you're saying by the sum total of the scene is the opposite.
Right.
Is that we're saying
you're condemning that idea. Yeah.
Yes. And it's about this character who, by the way, is not saying, any sort of horrible thing that I'm not going to say here for a soundbite. But you know what I mean? He's trying, and that doesn't make him okay. But we're also not making a joke. The joke is not on the subject matter. The joke is on him and his inability to get it right, to get it woke, to get it whatever. And so for me, I don't understand. I also don't think that if you have a show that whatever just sold to the Peacock for $550 million or whatever it is, someone's going to make the show. So I don't know. It's very complicated, especially during this time. It's incredibly complicated to know what is right and what is wrong. And do you not say that? But for me, what I look at in anything is the sum total, right? It's the whole stereotype, like, if you have a bad guy, the bad guy smokes, right? Because you were sending a subconscious message that he's smoking. But it's like, I just think the depth with which the characters were explored and the fact that everybody was kind of trying to get it right, even when they screwed up, I don't know, maybe makes it.
I totally agree. I think it holds up. We were talking about like Friday Night Lights. You can go back and watch Friday Night Lights, and there are lines where you're like, Jesus. But I think The Office has very, very few of those. I was actually surprised to hear Creed say, like, we couldn't have gotten away with that today. I was like, really?
I think you can both be right. I think what Brian's saying is right, but I bet you Creed's right too. I bet you they would say, yeah, listen, the joke is that it's a dummy boss who's screwing up and he is offensive, but we can't do it.
You can't say the words. And yeah, and by the way, I'm not even necessarily disagreeing with Creed. I think I'm questioning more
why.
I mean, the pendulum swings. It just does. And I think it's it's easier to say nothing, right? It's way easier to just say, no, you can't say that. You can't say that word, that idea, you can't express. But I don't know, maybe I'm a little more like Dave Chappelle in this idea that it becomes about the sum total. I'm not, by the way, that came off wrong. I'm not nearly as,
we're just a couple of comics together.
No, I'm not nearly the genius of Dave Chappelle, but I just mean maybe I lean more towards his thinking on some of these things, which is, when you say you're woke or super progressive, that means you're not. So I'm not going to say that. But I just feel like the sum total is what matters, not the specific words at times. But I do think there are things you can't say. I mean, like maybe Meredith making a joke about selling sex for meat. Maybe that. Maybe not that.
The good old days, huh?
That's such a good joke, though, when she's like, have you ever had filet, honey?
I think it's on character. That one, I don't
know. Do you have an episode in the podcast series tackling the post Steve Carell days? Because I feel like that's very highly debated and contested. I feel like actually people in later years are kind of coming around on it more. What's your thoughts on those final seasons without Steve?
Well, one of the things that we talk about that I think will be really new information for people, which I didn't even realize how new it was, but I'm going to be intentionally slightly vague in any way, but
you're a professional. I respect this.
There was the amount of discussion that happened between the network, between the creatives on the show, with input from the cast of our show, that how many people were weighing in on what is the show without Steve. And I think for me, it was very clear what it was and what it should be. And to Jenna Fisher specifically, who talks to this point and says to me that we use throughout. I don't think I've ever said this publicly. Talking about what we were experiencing there, and I've been hearing stuff, or there's every once in a while there's like a new revelation from The Office, which in part that's why we're doing the podcast, because we want people to hear from us, by us, what our recollection or experience on the inside was. And I just got asked, I did a Reddit AMA, right? And someone said, oh, there's a thing out there that James Spader was a pain in the ass to work with. And I was like, nothing could be further from the truth. I think he's a genius and was generous and kind. So it's like, I don't know where people get some of the stuff, but yes, in the podcast, we do talk about the transit. We talk about Steve leaving, obviously. We do an episode on that. And then talk about the transition after and sort of what decisions happened after to have the show, to continue the show.
Do you think that they're underrated episodes? I think in the moment, it was so jarring to have Steve leave that it's kind of just changed the vibe. But if you go back and watch those episodes, they're hilarious. There's still so many talented people on that show that it's still an incredibly, incredibly funny show that I think people kind of dismissed right when he left for reasons unbeknownst to me. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. And I will say specifically, I don't want to go too much in. I mean, there is stuff in the podcast about that. I would say that the thing I will say is I think that, to your point, the episodes and the journey leading up to how we ended the show are incredibly underrated to 100%. Me.
Yep.
To me, I think I would challenge people to find a better, more successful ending. And part of that came from the very beginning. Greg Daniels, our creator, said, we're telling a story, right? So what does the story have? It has a beginning. The documentary crew shows up to shoot a documentary. It has a middle. all the years that they're filming. Now, the one joke about the show is like, really? They were around for 9 years and never aired it? But, all right, there's been documentaries where that's true. And then 3, that the documentary airs. And that necessarily changes every single person who was shot, right? By Kevin Malone seeing himself on television and the way, just like a reality show, right? The way he was edited, the way right? Like I'm talking about character, not actor. Mm-hmm. That changes him. That changes Jim and Pam. That changes Michael Scott. Like everybody has changed based on that viewing. And so to me, I think that Greg did an amazingly successful idea of building that up. Like they know it's coming. And in some ways beginning to reveal the documentary crew through that last season, humanize them a little more, like, oh yeah, there are people who are there with them and have been there for 9 years as well that we don't see. I think that stuff excites me. I mean, so I was very proud of that.
We could talk about this for hours, so we will let you go. I want to get one last question in though. What's your vibe? As someone on the show, do you think the American or original British version is better?
You mean the little skit that they did in England?
That's a perfect answer.
That's the soundbite that's going to make Ricky fucking kill me. I think that they are. I think that truly, I just think they are totally different. Mm-hmm. I think you have when you're looking at 12 episodes, which was my joke, you're looking at 12 episodes and a special, and you're talking about 204, whatever we ended up doing. It gets complicated because of the hour longs and stuff, but you're just talking about a totally different beast. Mm-hmm. You're looking at, in the British version, you're looking at a slice of time, which, everyone is essentially staying in your lane and you have a love story playing out. That's what it is. You're talking about our show, you're talking about years of depth and marriages and kids and, the workplace evolving. It wasn't the same when we premiered as when we ended, even the stuff that we're talking about. So I truly just think that they're so different.
Ordinarily, I would be like, that's a cop-out answer, but I think in this case, it really makes sense. It's like
by the way, I was a humongous fan of the British version. I wanted to be the role of Kevin Malone on The Office because I was such a fan and I knew what that was, what that character was coming out of, and I loved the show. I just thought it was genius. But it's just so. It's funny. I don't even get asked that so much anymore. In the beginning, that was like all anyone would talk. That was all anyone was talking about. It's not the British version. Oh, it's not. Oh, it can't be the original. And nobody was watching it because I think whatever. I don't mean this politically, but like the progressive people who might be interested were like, they were already fans of the British version. And we've seen that.
Right.
And so, but I just think it, after even if you say not 2 years, even if you say, by 2-3 years, you get into episodes, the Christmas episodes that we did, and then like Booze Cruise and Casino Night, and when Pam and Jim finally kiss. You start to get into those episodes, and you're like, oh, okay. It's just a bigger thing, right? Not better, but just bigger.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is probably the best, funniest TV show of all time. And I what I really love, by the way, the fact that you're just like all in on it. And there's no like, I don't want to be known as Kevin Malone. I don't want to talk about The Office. It's like, let's give it its proper due and talk about only that. And I think fans are going to love this podcast.
Well, and let me say this, like on social media, right? I post a picture of me golfing and someone says like, don't spill the chili. I'm not all in on come on guys. Right. But to me, I think that it's about wanting this our story out from us, and really, to me it's it's fascinating that I'm in a Billie Eilish song. Like that's fucking fascinating. Like it's just right. Like that doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
Or that, like I'm playing golf with Michael Jordan. Like these things don't make sense to me. I know that they don't make sense to me. But it's like, what has happened to the show and all these things. It's like, it's just crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
That is utterly nuts. I would say, I think it's an unbelievable idea that I hope all my favorite shows do a podcast like this, but it's the only top elite that really like deserve it or require it. So thanks for doing it, because I think everyone's going to love it.
Well, thanks you guys. I'm a fan of yours. So good luck. And I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks so much. Go check it out. The Oral History of The Office with Brian Baumgartner, all your favorite stars from The Office, and be well, my man.
Thanks. All right.
Thank you so much.
Peace.